Well, over the last couple of days, there have been more positive reports on the Chicago Bulls and Josh Giddey reaching a deal sooner rather than later. A new report actually throws some water on those reports and says that the Bulls and Josh Giddey are actually still pretty far apart on deals, and that a stalemate could be starting. We're talking about it all and more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. According to Jake Fisher, that while there's been a lot of positive reports in regards to the Chicago Bulls and Josh Giddey, that the optimism may not actually be the reality of what's happening in the negotiations between the two. Saying this, that still financially expectations have complicated matters. Multiple sources report that Giddey's camp is holding firm to a $30 million per year asking price. The Bulls, meanwhile, are reportedly offering something closer to $20 million annually, creating a significant gap that both sides have yet to bridge. They go on to actually compare this as well to the Lauri Markkanen situation in 2021, saying this. The standoff recalls Chicago's 2021 negotiations with Lauri Markkanen, which dragged on for weeks before a sign and trade materialized in late August. Once again, the Bulls appear content to let the restricted free agency market play out in their favor, especially in a summer where few teams have cap space to make a competitive offer. Giddey's visible absence from the Bulls' first two Summer League games only added to the speculation. While several teammates, including Kobe White and Patrick Williams, sat courtside, Giddey stayed away from the spotlight. As Fisher noted, that silence may suggest that contract talks have hit a snag. Now, we've already talked about how people have used the Josh Giddey not being out there in Summer League as a thing to point towards some type of turmoil going on with the Chicago Bulls and the contract negotiations. You know, I take that for what you will, whatever it is. But keep in mind, we just heard a couple of days ago that Josh Giddey actually sat down and talked with Billy Donovan with a meeting set to happen with the Chicago Bulls front office sometime this week. It's Thursday. Now, we don't know if that meeting has happened yet or anything like that, but it's the fact that we're already in Thursday and the meeting was supposed to happen sometime this week. It raises some questions on, did that meeting happen and they're still far apart on the deal where they maybe thought they were going to bridge the gap that were between the two sides? Or is it that meeting just has not happened yet? But to hear that the Bulls and Josh Giddey may be close to $10 million apart on the next contract is a pretty sizable gap. That's not the $3 million. That's not the $4 million that we talked about before. That's $10 million per. That means that if it's a 3-year deal, that's $30 million. If it's a 5-year deal, that's $50 million. That's a pretty large gap to have. If you're trying to re-sign him for long term. And it's unfortunate when it comes down to it because it does not seem like this is going to be something that is going to be ending anytime soon without one of the sides making pretty large caveats into what is going to happen with either team. With either side and what their asking price is. We've talked about before Josh getting the asking price of $30 million annually, right? We talked about that. We talked even about that in the Jalen Suggs. We went in detail on the comparisons with Jalen Suggs' numbers and Josh Giddey's numbers. Josh Giddey's basically scored more points, had more rebounds, more assists, whereas Jalen Suggs has been a better defender than Josh Giddey by far. But, it is what it is when it comes down to that. You're going to use whatever you can in your negotiation poise and your tactics and your talks when you're trying to negotiate the deal that's favorable to your client or favorable to your side. But hearing that it's this large of a gap potentially between these two teams, I tell you what, while I thought before that maybe that Josh Giddey wouldn't take the qualifying offer, $10 million per annually of a difference, that may be an area where you take the qualifying offer and bet on yourself. If that is to be true. Now, again, take everything with a grain of salt, even though Jake L. Fisher is somebody that I do actually listen to and I like what he says. And I do think that he's heard it. I don't know the sources that he's heard it from. It's still taken with a huge grain of salt on how that could actually impact it. But unfortunately, it looks like Josh Giddey and the Chicago Bulls are pretty far apart on a potential contract. And what does that mean for the two sides? We just don't know what it comes down to. So Like I said, hopefully they have not had the meeting yet. For all we know, they could be having the meeting now. Maybe the sides will bridge it. I think a fair kind of gap between the two sides is that put incentives in the contract. Like if Josh Giddey wants to bet on himself, put incentives in the contract, whether it's assist numbers, whether it's number of game played, wherever it is, and put that in it to where he can achieve close to the $30 million that he wants. But again, it's based off performance. And so, we'll see if that's something that the Bulls are able to do, if they're willing to do, if Josh Giddey's side is willing to accept it. It's harder to bet on yourself like that, but we shall see what's going to happen here. But let me know what you guys think on that down below, as far as hearing that the Bulls and Josh Giddey could be as much as $10 million apart on the next deal. And we got another update as well. So Jonathan Kuminga has been a player that a lot of Bulls fans have talked about over the course of the summer. There's been a lot of rumors linking Jonathan Kuminga to the Chicago Bulls. Well, Jake L. Fisher actually had an update to that as well on his blog today, where he says this. Kuminga and his camp were hopeful for a sign and trade scenario with the Chicago Bulls. That interest wasn't one-sided, but the Sacramento Kings had shown the most external interest early on. Chicago surfaced as a realistic target, but the Bulls' complicated negotiations with restricted free agent Josh Giddey and a wide gap in salary expectations ultimately derailed any momentum. The idea of Kuminga landing in Chicago gained some online traction, especially after the rumors tied Warriors center Nikola Vucevic to a possible swap. However, for now, it appears Kuminga will stay in the Bay Area, which may be something Kuminga doesn't want. Now, I wanted to talk about this because there have been a lot of people, even as soon as today, I had somebody leave a comment that, I want this Josh Giddey thing to get over with so we can pivot towards a signing trade for Jonathan Kuminga. I think not only a combination of what's going on with Josh Giddey, but I also think the Bulls offseason clearly shows that the Bulls aren't in the market for a forward anymore. You drafted Noah Essengay, who is maybe going to be your long-term forward mate with Matas Buzelis. And even now, without having Noah Essengay as a sure part in that starting lineup with him, you still got Isaac Okoro, who you traded for, Kevin Huerter, who was your starting three at the end of last season, Ayo Dosunmu, who can play the three, Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, right? You have a nice clog there at the 3-4 position. And keep in mind, you're still trying to develop Matas Buzelis into being more of a scorer himself. So I just always saw, after the drafting of Noah Essengay, and then even further when we traded for Isaac Okoro, I just saw that place, that spot that may have been on the roster for Jonathan Kuminga was just no longer there. It really didn't make any sense. But hearing that Jonathan Kuminga and his camp actually wanted to come to Chicago, I think does say a lot about not only the youth movement, but also the opportunity that Jonathan Kuminga and his camp potentially saw for him to be more of himself there, right? And that's something that it's clear that Kuminga is valuing in this free agent period, is that he wants to go to a spot where he's able to be more of himself and have an opportunity to really play his game, which he hasn't really had with the Golden State Warriors. Now, could that have been here in Chicago? I think when you have two ball-dominant players in Josh Giddey and Kobe White, it's a little bit tougher. Even then, I know he's not Steph, they're not Dre, right? They're not Jimmy Butler, they're not those players, but it's still a little bit more difficult to get the full range to be yourself. But and then, like I said, you got to look at what that would have potentially taken away from Matas Buzelis, as well as he's trying to grow into a guy that gets more shots, more opportunities and things. And I already know Winton's already typing away at his keyboard something in regards to being, hyperbolic about Matas Buzelis. But, it is what it is when it comes down to it. And that's why I always say that a lot of these offseason rumors, they may be a reflection of things and talks that are happening behind the scenes, but a lot of times it is just writers looking at the situation and surveying it and linking two parties together that make sense on paper. Now, according to this, the Bulls did reach out and they did have some interest in Jonathan Kuminga, but it seems like they wanted to shore up what they had here first before going out and adding another big-time contract. We talked a little bit about that on today's daily episode as well, how, the Bulls have to make sure of some assurances with what they have now before they lose out on flexibility and lock themselves into this build. And that's what they did before. They locked themselves into a build that they just didn't have the necessary data to really show, all right, are they going to get better year after year? How much do we have to add to it? It seems like the Bulls are having more patience now with this current build and figuring out what it needs to look like. So, and I for one commend that. I know that that's the longer play. That's a play that's more frustrating for fans because you want this team to win now because we've been losing for too long. But in reality, you just want to make sure going in too early is just as bad as not going in at all. It could really hurt your team and the future trajectory of it. And the sign and trade for Jonathan Kuminga was never going to be the most easy thing to complete. The Vooch for Kuminga trade would have been very difficult to complete. There were ways to get it done, but it would have taken a lot of layers to get that done. Now, who's to say with the Josh Giddey news as far as the Bulls being $10 million apart potentially, maybe that makes them pivot back to Jonathan Kuminga if they end up, knock on wood, losing Josh Giddey. But that's a story and a thing for another day that we'll cover at another time. As it stands right now, though, these two updates in regards to the Bulls on Jonathan Kuminga and Josh Giddey are things that, at first Kuminga makes some sense. As far as Josh Giddey, I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting more and more worried the longer this thing goes on. But you guys can let me know how you feel down below. Make sure you guys are following us at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like we like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.